very pleased to introduce, and I won't introduce everybody on the panel, but I will introduce our esteemed moderator, Dr. Emily Rycart. And oftentimes we get the question, I'm sure many of you do, in terms of external innovation and how basically the ecosystems can benefit. And I think that you'll find that this panel not only sheds a great deal of light on that, but will elicit a lot of interesting questions. So without further ado, please give them a big round of applause, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Rycart.
Can everyone hear me that's in the back? Excellent. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Emily Rycart. I'm the CEO of Greentown Labs. And just to give you a little background on what that's all about, Greentown Labs is the largest clean technology incubator in the United States, and we help entrepreneurs solve the world's biggest energy and environmental challenges. And we're located just a stone's throw from here in Boston terms, over in Somerville, Mass. And that's kind of where the cool hip startups like to be, so that's why we're there. We, at this time, have about 80 companies that we support in a 100,000 square foot space. We have just expanded and opened a headquarters that we call the Global Center for Clean Tech Innovation. So we help companies that are in the, I'd say, stage of prototyping through their Series A round of investment. So it's typically about a 2-year process to go through that, and that's the period that we support companies with space, with resources, with connections to a network and investors. And so that's what we do at Greentown Labs. Now, it so happens that in the clean tech industry, there is a really active engagement going on at this point with large corporations. And we personally, at Greentown Labs, work with about 40 corporations. And why do we do that? It's because it's really essential for clean tech companies to be able to partner with large corporations. And what do I mean when I say large corporations? So for example, utilities, large energy companies, companies that are developing building materials. Those type of companies are going to often have the reach and have the manufacturing prowess and expertise that we will need in order to get products to market at scale. So for clean tech in particular, you are often developing a product that is physical. What does that mean? You're developing a prototype, something that's handheld. You need mechanical or electronic help. You also could be developing a new coating for a solar panel, for example, or to make things condense faster. In that case, you probably need expertise around those particular type of sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So you're going to need specific expertise around building those physical things. And often you're going to need to be able to have a partner that's going to help you get there. And that partner is going to need to be typically a strategic partner that is going to be with you through the duration. Because while you can build a software company in a coffee shop overnight, put your app in the app store, and then you have a product in the market, it's very different for clean tech products. Imagine if you're building a sensor system that's going to help you be more efficient in the home, or you're building a high altitude wind turbine that's going to help you get power to remote locations that is clean energy. So all of these things mean that you are typically going to be making a physical product. And so for that reason, it takes longer, and often you're talking about business to business type products. So for example, you might need a utility to work with you in order to get your product to consumers, who then would be able to use their energy in their home more efficiently. So you need that often B2B, because these products are often B2B, you might need that corporate partner. And then the other thing to know is that in the clean tech industry right now, there's not a whole lot of traditional venture capital. And why is that? Well, back in 2006, 7, 8, clean tech, well, a lot of people put money in and a lot of people lost money in it. And I think there was a lot of lessons learned in that process, but at the end of the day, the traditional venture capital that's out there is often not looking for clean tech investments. And so the strategic capital from a large corporation can often be helpful and is increasingly getting involved in the earlier stage of startup development. And so that's another way that corporate partners can help clean tech startups in a very unique way. That these partnerships, and this is something that we'll cover quite extensively in the panel today, are not straightforward. They're not easy, and that's because you're talking about a startup that is potentially, when it is in its early stages, 5 people trying to interact with a corporation that may be 100,000 people or more. How does that startup even know where to start in that large corporation? So there's navigation issues. There's also a lot of issues around timescales. A startup can often be a different company in a 6-month time period, where it might take a large corporation 6 months to make a decision. And so those timescales don't always match up, and therefore it's hard to do these partnerships. And we'll be covering this quite extensively through a couple of very specific examples in today's panel. So first and foremost, I wanted to share that we are very lucky today to have 4 wonderful panelists who are also partnered in startup corporate partnerships. So first and foremost, I'll go from the end here. We have Julie Fairland, who's the general manager at Shell TechWorks, and Mike Phillips, next to Julie, who's the CEO of Sense. And Shell, the tech ventures part of Shell, has invested in Sense. So that's an example of a startup corporate partnership that is, would you say, working at this point? So we know that there are actually partnerships out there that are doing well. And then sitting next to Mike, we have Bernhard van Vakeno, and he's the head of North American Center for Research on Advanced Materials with BASF. And we have Miguel Galvez, who's the CEO of Npd Nano. And Npd Nano has been invested in by BASF. And how's this partnership going?
Also very well.
Awesome. So we have 2 great examples for you today. And so what I'd like to do is start off by asking the panelists to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about who they are, what they do, specifically their company, and then talk a little bit about the partnership so you get a flavor of the partnerships that we're talking about today. And after that, we'll get into some general questions about corporate partnerships, and following that, we will have a question and answer period. So I hope that you're ready to dive in. I think we have a great set of speakers today. So I will start by asking Miguel to do his intro and tell us a little bit about that partnership with BASF.
Absolutely. Thank you, Emily. So my name is Miguel Galvez. I'm the CEO of a company called Npd Nano, which is a startup company in advanced materials. We make coatings and additives that modify surface properties. We're pretty diversified, but to give you a couple examples, coatings that reduce fingerprints on smartphone displays, coatings that make plastics harder on flexible plastics for like films, additives for plastic and paints that are non-stick, anti-dirt kind of things, and then an adhesive for glass. Sorry, I get confused because we have so many products now. As Emily mentioned, we raised our Series B back in October from BASF Ventures, as well as Henkel Ventures. So we're very much a strategic-led investment round. We've been around for 6 years, so we're at the tail end of this, or I guess commencing the second part of commercialization. I was telling Bernhard before that I believe commercialization comes in two stages. The first stage is talking to corporate partners, understanding their needs, understanding the needs of the marketplace, developing partnerships, and meeting technical requirements. And the second phase of commercialization is manufacturing, global logistics, global sales, and expanding our sales pipeline, which is we're in the second part of. As Emily touched upon, Our types of businesses, and especially materials businesses, are heavily relied on corporate partnerships. A lot of what I do, a lot of what my sales team does, is identify who are the corporate partners that make sense for us, try to build relationships, try to find the right people within those companies, and find the champion in those companies who's really going to put their neck out for us and try to build a business with us. So yeah, it's been 6 years, and I can certainly talk to our good and our bad experiences. We've had plenty of bad experiences as well. And what are the key things you need to look out for when building these sort of corporate relationships as a startup?
Awesome. Bernhard.
So to add on this and to complete the couple, my name is Bernhard von Vacano. I'm with BASF, global chemical company, global presence based in Germany, in Ludwigshafen headquarter. Myself, I'm heading an sort of external innovation effort based here in the Boston area because I'm the head of our alliance, which we built with Harvard, MIT, and UMass Amherst to look for new technologies, especially in the academic space. But as this is really an ecosystem that is expanding beyond the academic space, we have increasingly also worked looking into technologies that are out there and that might be available with startups and really expanding on this maybe more traditional open innovation academic interaction. I'm working very closely with our ventures group, which were also very important in making this investment happen. We have a colleague also on site here. Well, building on external innovation, as I mentioned, was traditionally for us always very important to look for academic and trying to find new chemistries that we could translate into products in our own labs. We've always been, being a chemical company and also being in this business-to-business situation, almost always, because BASF almost has no products that you would really be in contact with as a customer. Maybe some of you remember magnetic tapes, but that's long over. So we have this situation, so we do a lot of innovation and co-innovation with customers, but that would be typically larger companies. And in between, there is a space that's very interesting, and that's startups. And that comes also with the realization that even as one of the biggest chemical companies with a strong R&D, in-house R&D capability of 10,000 people globally, you cannot follow all the things that are out there. And with the diversified areas in science, and also if you look at the landscape of competitors, it's not just a few big players in the chemical space that would sort of dominate the market. It's really diverse and it being more and more so. So you have to be part of this. You have to look out for opportunities. You cannot believe that you can do everything yourself, and that's part of the rationale behind really building these kind of external relations and being part of the ecosystem, which is also why we are really proud members of Greentown Labs.
Sorry. So many microphones. Hi, I'm Mike Phillips. I'm the CEO of Sense, a Cambridge-based company. Let me give you a little, and I'll tell you what we do in a minute. Let me give you a little background first. I've been in the Boston-based software tech world for quite some time. I was at MIT many years ago and then started two companies doing speech recognition software, one called SpeechWorks, one called Lingo. And then in 2013, myself and my other co-founders decided we wanted to get into the energy space. Could we take what we know from consumer-facing technology and how to apply it to help people save energy in their homes, for example? So Sense, the company that came out of that, basically we built a little piece of hardware. It goes inside your electrical panel, measures your power just like a meter does, but at crazy high resolution. We measure 1 million times a second the power coming into your house, which again, I know sounds crazy, but we do that because then we can do signal processing and machine learning, just like we used to do in the speech recognition world, to figure out what things are on and off in your house and how much power they're using, and then use that with a consumer-facing application to try to help people be more efficient in their homes and so on. So the reason I gave you all that background, we come to this we know a lot about consumer-facing tech, but nothing about the energy world other than as consumers of it. So it's been great. We were first working in Greentown Labs, so that was a great place to get exposed. And then as we were looking for investment rounds, I got to tell you, 2 years ago, if you had asked me, would Shell be one of our investors, I think that's crazy. Why would an oil company invest in this little tech startup trying to save people energy. It doesn't make any sense. But we started meeting with some really nice people at Shell, a guy named Henrik Holland, and found we had very complementary views around the future of energy and how that's going to change over time. And we were, coming at from very, very different sides of the space, but also had very common goals about how do we, look to a new energy future and how to make things more efficient. So continued discussion, and then Shell invested in our A round just about 2 years ago, and it's been great working with these guys ever since. There really is even though we're very different types of companies, as I say, working on very different time scales, as Emily mentions, just knowing that the goals are so well aligned is super, super positive for us. So it's been a great relationship.
Glad to hear it. So I'm Julie Ferland. I'm the general manager at Shell TechWorks. So we're in one of Shell's innovation engines, and Shell has kind of a spectrum of innovation that bridges all the way from academia and investment in targeted research in the academic world, all the way through. We kind of sit on the far end of that. And so my team here in Cambridge is comprised of all what Shell would refer to as experienced hires, folks that have at least 5 years in some other industry, and that ranges have a lot more years in multiple other industries. So our team was formed to try and bridge over and bring technologies in that solve challenges in other industries and see how they can fit to unique challenges inside Shell. So I've only been with Shell for 3 years. That's very odd amongst Shell employees. I think it took me about 1.5 years in Shell before I met someone who had been there for less than 15. And my whole team falls into that. So we have a certain empathy that, as part of our reason for being located here, is we try and recruit in entrepreneurial minds that are really interested to see what their deep knowledge in some other industry can do across Shell's businesses. And I know it's been fascinating to me to learn more about Shell as a company, and I think it breaks a lot of the mental models, at least I had, of an oil and gas company, that it's a company that's very much in front of the energy transition and really facing it head on, and is also a very broad company that does everything from, we're the second largest energy trader in the US. I had no idea of that a couple of years ago. So, there is a lot to be leveraged, and we consider it really fortunate that we get the opportunity to partner with other businesses, both through our venture arm and through helping to disrupt supply chains by bringing in startups, bringing in smaller suppliers that can really disrupt the kind of Borg that had been built up around the oil and gas industry, and really innovate in new and exciting ways across a whole bunch of different value chains. So we really value the partnerships, both in terms of the opportunity to invest and learn from small companies, but also the kind of cultural opportunities to be able to expand the realm of the possible in a company like Shell, and to help going both ways with smaller partners that we can leverage their speed and agility to help break the mindset of kind of things having to move at a glacial or a geologic pace, but also going the other way, that we hope that we can help understand the value of scale and the value of the corporate partnership to a smaller startup, to be able to kind of understand where the market drivers are, where you can leverage a really broad company like Shell and the global footprint that company has.
Great. Well, thanks for those intros, panel. And I'll throw the first question back to Julie at the end there. How have you thought about managing expectations and processes internally to make it easier for Shell to work with startups? So we've talked about time scales. You are interested in working with startups as part of your external innovation process. How do you actually do that inside a big company? Give us a couple examples.
So I think part of my role and my team's role is to provide a bridge there. So having a team here that are mostly entrepreneurial minds, folks that came out of the startup world but are living inside the Shell engine, we kind of develop a level of empathy that Shell TechWorks was actually started almost like a startup inside Shell. It wasn't started from some corporate mandate. It was actually started by two outsiders to Shell that wanted to see how we could innovate in new and interesting ways, and kind of got buy-in from Shell's management. But in that same way of our day-to-day I won't say struggle, but our day-to-day challenges operating as an innovation engine inside Shell, we have an understanding and have found ways of navigating through the company that we hope that we can share and help. And in what you mentioned earlier of, in a company of 100,000 people, it can be challenging to know, oh, I met so-and-so from Shell, but I've probably never met that person from Shell. It's such a big company, and to know kind of which direction to go in, who to talk to, and who to talk to on different subjects. That there's a lot of intellectual curiosity in a company, so you'll get people that are willing to talk about anything, but might not actually be able to help enable a relationship. So that's one element of it that we hope to be able to do, is to kind of navigate that corporate maze and understand the right pathways, but also to, on the timescale side of things, to help set the right expectations. That I see it as a push and pull in both directions. Mm-hmm. That it's very important for me to be constantly pushing against the rest of my company to force the realm of the possible, that you really can move quicker. We can get things fielded in a short amount of time, and these kind of partnerships don't require, well, we decided in June that we're going to fund it in January, and then maybe in another 3 years we'll actually see something in the field. That there's definitely a drive in the industry to get things fielded quicker. There's a drive when you go out to Shell's assets. Trust me, the end users are really excited to get something quick, and so we kind of can leverage what's possible inside startups to kind of prod that engine along.
So I heard a couple things there. One is that Shell TechWorks itself is kind of a separate outside engine of Shell that is structured to be able to better work with startups. I think that's kind of what you're saying, and that you as an entity can help navigate through the process of finding the right people within Shell.
Absolutely, that's our hope, and that's a big part of what we hope we bring to the table as an organization to
I can
help bridge
tell
those.
Mike wants to add something to this.
Yeah,
so.
I was just going to say that's absolutely the case here, and I think it's super important. Just so you know, we've been working with the TechWorks guys, and we haven't done a big project yet, but I think it's partly because the TechWorks team are guiding us to where things are going to make sense or not make sense. And I can mention I've done other deals in previous companies, like in my previous company, Lingo, we did a big deal with Samsung. That ended up being a great thing for the company. We went from a couple million users to 300 million users because we were on every single Samsung Galaxy phone. But the process for doing that was almost killed us. I mean, it was like, just because the decision making was so different between a company like Samsung, who has a very special way of being difficult, I think, a little Cambridge-based startup.
Hopefully no one from Samsung in the audience.
Yeah, if so.
I can agree with that.
They know it.
Ways of being difficult.
But it was because there was no kind of group like that that could help be the interface between a startup and how decisions get made at a very different kind of company. So it made it super, super difficult, whereas we haven't had that problem here.
So there's a need for an interface, is what you're saying. A particular group that is kind of
whether it's
playing
an
that role?
interface or individuals in the company that understands both the needs of the big company and the way the big company works and how the startup works. So it's more like at least the champion who can work throughout the organization. Because if it's just left to the product teams that do things in the normal way, they have a tendency to kill startups.
Miguel, tell us a little bit about your experience. You basically said you do materials research and development and make products using materials. Therefore, you kind of have to partner with corporates. What's been your experience?
Yeah, it's been definitely mixed. I think just to follow up what Mike and echo what Mike said. So what I've seen companies do, and I've interacted with many different Fortune 500s, both here in the States and then also large companies in Korea and Japan and China and a lot of European companies as well. And we find that the companies that it's easiest to work with are the ones that have a dedicated organization like BASF, like Shell TechWorks, that have distinct entities where they're either venture arms, there's either someone who does tech scouting, because often those are the folks that bring you to the right folks within the business organization and try to be your internal champion. But to Emily, to your question in terms of what our general experience has been like and how do we as a company, think about navigating corporate partners, I think it's a two-way street. I think it's one is understanding what you want to get out of a relationship. I mean, if you as a small company try to engage with BASF or Shell or any large company, and particularly BASF that is so diversified in so many industries, and as a company which is a platform material, you can often get trapped in this realm of, well, let's try it out here, let's see if it works, let's just do some basic fundamental science and experiments and not really get anywhere. And we struggled a lot in the early days with that exact problem. And the way we ended up mitigating it or getting around it is just saying, screw it, we're going to go to the end customer. We're gonna go out, we're going to find the applications where our technology makes sense, we're going to build those relationships, not because we have an intention of selling to our direct customers directly, though in some cases that makes sense, but more so because we needed the business case validation to go back to a partner, a large chemical company like BASF or others, to say, no, this is a real market, this is a market we have traction in, and this is a product that makes sense, and we need your expertise to manufacture this, to get global distribution, and to really turn this into a big product. So we ended up taking the reverse review. So we were not going to work with partners because we had a lot of negative experiences until we had clear, validated business cases, and then go back to the partners and really use them as leverage and scale.
Got it. So Bernhard, from your perspective, when should a startup, kind of picking up on this theme of maybe it doesn't always make sense in this you got to know when in a startup's life or evolution it's time to actually kind of start talking to a corporate partner. What's your experience with that, Bernhard, in terms of when do you think someone's ready, or what's the experience? How do you know when a startup comes to you whether or not they're ready? For example, Miguel mentioned knowing what you get out of the relationship. So tell me your thoughts about that.
I think the exact timing will depend on exactly also what's in it in the partnership and what the startup is looking for and what we might be able to provide. Thinking about very early startups and thinking about the academic research, and they may be a startup that is spun out directly from a project with a university, that might be completely different than looking at more scoped out business case that you might have. And asking for someone to help scale a business and really go to, so that's different. I wouldn't say that please only talk to us if you have 5 solid business cases, because also from a technology perspective, there can be things that make sense early on, or maybe even some guidance. That's part of the also of the ecosystem approach. That of course at Greentown is really nice. You have 80 companies that are all facing similar challenges, like hard tech challenges, making things to make things work, and yeah. So. But to make it a case for investment, for example, for BASF, we always want to have some strategic alignment. So we always want to see that this makes sense, that this is not just a good investment, but also sort of fits into businesses that are there or that are imaginable. And of course, if you have something that can show that, and in this case, it was really that they came and could show that they have customers that are interested in it, which were our customers for maybe base materials, which could be improved using their technology. So that was very compelling. So I would say it depends. The good thing is, the important thing is to really know what you're looking for, because then also I myself, in a role that also serves as an access point to the network in the company, can help to make the right connections.
I think a point I'd like to pick up on there that you mentioned is what's different when a startup is pitching a venture capitalist and when a startup is pitching a corporate partner, and how they need to be thinking about the strategic aims of the corporate, and the time scale of those aims can be 5 or 10 years out. Julie, when startups are interacting with Shell TechWorks, or in your experience with Shell Tech Ventures, are they coming to you with an idea of how they fit into your future picture, or do you have some short-term opportunities for startups to get involved? How do you think about that time scale, when working with the startup?
I think it's a combination of the two, and we're fortunate that here in Cambridge we have a fairly significant presence from Shell's venture arm, Shell Technology Ventures, sitting right 10 feet away from my desk, and we work closely, and I think there's a couple different elements to that. Obviously, on the venture side, a lot of those decisions are made to play off the previous point that they're made based on what the strategy of the company is and where strategic investments are being made. And those won't always make sense to the startup coming in that might give a really bang up pitch and that might be, really resonate with the individuals, but that might not align with the corporate strategy. But there's still a lot of opportunity for forming the right partnerships. And I'll use an example. There's a company called Analytic Space that's being incubated at the Engine, and I met them at Hub Week a couple of years ago. Had some common backgrounds. Now they're doing some really cool stuff in terms of global communication. Is that something that I could pitch to someone in Shell? Probably not. It's not. It's just not in the mindset of the ability to do micro communication from satellites. Is not like registering to any of the heads of business inside Shell. But the other element to corporate partnership like that is just having those relationships in the network, because what we do run into a lot at TechWorks is we're out in the field across all of Shell's assets and kind of hearing these problem statements. So being up to speed on these kind of ideas that seem out there but might be more near term than you think can help us open up new spaces that might provide a strategic fit for that in the future. That when we look out and say, okay, well, how do we communicate across, a large land-based oil field or a massive facility that's fairly remote and has, you go to Sakhalin Energy in Russia and they don't have Wi-Fi in their office, and you kind of go, is this the same company that I work for? That and so you realize that there are places in the company where that might not be being thought of at the strategic level, but when you get down to the end user level, there were real sweet spots that could provide, whether it's not an investment, we could very well become a customer to companies like that. And so just developing those relationships and being able to talk through different use cases with the startups in the area helps a tremendous amount on both sides for us to help understand what the realm of possible is inside Shell, and also for the startups to kind of understand what different use cases might be that they might not be seeing if you didn't have familiarity with these kind of wacky things that we do.
Mike, any thoughts on pitching VCs versus corporate strategics? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the case that the venture capitalists have a bit of a problem, in my view, that there's a really strong herd mentality. That they tend to invest in certain areas and then run away from it, and that's exactly what's happened in energy. And in fact, if you look at the combination, we're in this weird combination of consumer-facing energy and Boston, and the three don't mix from a venture capitalist perspective. So we found at our A round that we really had, and even before that in our seed funding, that we had to find the strategics that mattered. And the good news is, because we're a very interesting twist. If you take an energy company that has no visibility into the consumer world, we're actually a really interesting twist for them. So we have investment not only from Shell, but also from energy impact partners whose investors are the big investor in utilities, and they have no visibility into companies like us. So it's a really nice mix for us to be able to have this thing that doesn't match the venture capital model, but matches very well kind of the future business of these really, really big industry players.
Well, I want to ask, well, we have a question from the audience. I wanted to ask one more question, but why don't you jump in? All right. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I'd say it entirely depends on your business. So we're unique in the sense that we have so many products, which in many cases that turns a lot of VCs off. I mean, for good reason, but we have a luxury because we have so many different applications areas that we can take strategics that have different interests. A lot of I think the issues that you call upon are signaling risk about forcing the management team to do things that may not make a lot of sense. And then generally, are you mature enough to have the protocols in place to be taken seriously by a strategic. And so I think it really depends on kind of where your business is and kind of what the focus going forward is going to be. But if you can find alignment, I would always, and I mentor a lot of friends who are starting materials companies, is to do it as early as possible. Because the benefits often outweigh the negatives, but you have to have a very clear idea of what you want to get out of it and what are the potential risks down the road and how you mitigate them. But I'm a firm believer that the earlier you bring that on, the more valuable it will be for the startup. Now, whether that's more valuable to the organization is going to depend entirely whether that startup can execute. A lot of companies, I've seen strategics invest in seed rounds even, and those companies aren't even close to commercialization. And so how much value is that strategic getting at? I don't know. But from a starter's perspective, I always push folks to do it earlier if they can find the alignment.
Mike, do you want to? Oh,
Yeah, or
Go ahead.
Just adding on that, I think if I look at the policies that our venture group really have, they really try to behave like a venture capitalist in this regard, because if you're you don't want to control or you don't want to early on strangle a startup and deter other investors, so they're always looking for a strong also like venture capitalist other partner or other corporate investor. It's not about gaining as early as possible as much control over the company as possible, because then also your investment as an investment is potentially not as valuable, and it's probably not the reason why you would invest in a startup. So it's an excellent point, and I would say generally, at least from our experience, this is something we really try to play in a way that's beneficial for the startup, because we believe that's also in the long term beneficial for our relationship with startups, because if you do that several times and it doesn't turn out well, I don't know how well that will work the sixth time. So it's really trying to be part of, trying to play a constructive role there, and making sure there's a mutual benefit in there for both.
And Mike, I don't know, did you want to add anything there?
No, I'm sorry.
Right. Oh, wow. I love it when the audience asks questions. Let's jump in. Sir, you've been like avidly watching us the entire time, so.
So, directed at BASF. So, how do you prevent? So, let's say that a startup might has some pretty interesting technology that is actually being worked on at BASF. So, how do you build that firewall that the people at BASF say, well, gee whiz, we were doing exactly the same thing, and then Mike says, gee whiz, you stole what we, so how do you work that so both parties feel that they're not
Believe it or not, this is nothing unusual for working with startups, because as you can, for example, we have a coatings business that sells car coatings to car manufacturers. At the same time, we have a coatings raw materials business that not only sells to our own coatings business, but to their competitors in the world. So in chemical industry, you're always, very often, your supplier for someone and their customer maybe in another field, and you really have to manage these firewalls anyhow. And that's, maybe it adds complexity if you do that with a startup, and but it's nothing completely new. Because this kind of relationships and managing ideas and IP and so on, it's happening all the time if you work with other companies and in different areas. So you need to, so we can handle these firewalls, but sometimes you might not even need them depending on how it's set up and what is it really exactly the same space he's working on or not, and how deeply do you need to get involved there? Is it the same people? So there are several ways of handling this, and there's not just one way of doing it. We believe there's, of course, it's complicated and maybe more risky than not doing anything, but the value of working with externals and going out and doing these things is much higher than just staying for yourself and not reaching out.